Hi, I'm Mark Mers. I'm the 2024 president of the Appalachian Highlands chapter of Wild Ones. I'm here to welcome you to our chapter's presentation of Rod Walker. He's with PRISM. He's here to talk with us about managing invasive species. First, I'm going to share with you that Blueridge PRISM's mission statement says that PRISM reduces the impact of invasive plants on the ecosystems of the northern Blue Ridge Mountains and surrounding areas through regional and statewide advocacy, landowner support, implementing control measures, and public education. So that's what PRISM does. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Rod Walker. Married for over 40 years, Rod and his wife Maggie have been timberland owners for that entire time and more. Prior to retiring, their professional background spanned journalism, real estate, sales, law, and IT consulting. Rod and Maggie purchased land in Albemarle County in 1998. While working on their property and discovering Asiatic bittersweet, Jake Hughes from the Shenandoah National Park made them aware of the concept of cooperative weed management areas, or CWMAs. Together with Jake, they organized the first CWMA to be formed in Virginia in 2014. And that is what's now known as Blueridge PRISM. Rod serves on the Blue Ridge PRISM board. He's also on the board of directors for the Virginia chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation, the Noxious Weeds Advisory Committee for the state of Virginia, which recommends changes to the state's noxious weeds law and regulations, and the advisory board for the Virginia Forestry Association's board of directors. Both Rod and Maggie are Virginia master naturalists. Also, Rod was recently named 2023 Tree Farmer of the Year by the Virginia chapter of the American Tree Farm Association. Before I let you continue with the presentation, I would like to invite you to find out a little bit more about Wild Ones if you're not already a member, and consider joining.
Okay, here we go. So yeah, welcome, welcome everybody. So I'm going to be talking about invasive plants. Let's see. The question is, can I get control here and get my slides to actually move? Okay, so here's the kinds of topics I'm going to talk about a little bit here tonight. What is the problem? Hey, why are these things a problem? I'll talk a little bit about the Blue Ridge PRISM and what we do. And then I'm going to do if you will, some samples of how we present the identification of some of the common invasive plants. And we'll talk about some of the different methods for dealing with them, and talk about where you can get a lot more information. And one of the things I'll talk about in here is kind of the landowner education things that we do, which includes separate sessions on identification, separate sessions on control, and actually some field work as well. And that's like 4 to 6 hours worth of stuff. So I'm just going to touch on some of those things and perhaps give examples of some of them so you can see the kinds of things that we do. And if you've got questions about specific plants and issues or techniques, yeah, happy to take all those questions. And actually, I don't mind if people interrupt me as we go along. Whatever works, but there'll be an opportunity at the end for questions as well. So what's the problem? Why is this a problem? I describe this sometimes as it's kind of a slow motion tsunami. Yeah, that's surrounding us, if you will. A lot of people don't even know what's happening. I mean, all they see is green plants out there, and they say, "Hey, if it's green, hey, how bad can it be?" But what's really going on here is we have a lot of overseas invaders, if you will, that are slowly but surely replacing our native plants. And most of these were actually brought here on purpose with good motivations. Some were brought by accident. But in all cases, people really did not understand the risks of bringing these plants into this new environment. Now, to be clear, while we're going to be talking about non-native plants, only a few of the non-native plants that have been brought into the country are really problems from the standpoint of being invasive. There's a small number of them, a relatively small number of them, where there's no bugs, no fungi, no grazing animals, no caterpillars. There's nothing that keeps them in check. And many of them have a tendency to either leaf out early or stay green late in the season. Some can adapt to many different kinds of soils. Some produce just huge numbers of seeds. They have different techniques that allow them to be particularly aggressive. But so why is this a problem? Well, the way I look at it, the core reason why it's a problem is that literally nothing stops them. I mean, they will just continue to spread until they fill, all the client or soil niches, that happen to work for them. And eventually they will generally overwhelm and replace the native vegetation that's in those niches. And as if that weren't enough, it's not just a plant issue. I mean, our native wildlife of all kinds is going to be, or is being impacted and will be impacted as well, because our native wildlife it basically eats the native plants and lives off the native plants, and to generally speaking, these invasives do not service our wildlife. In other words, our wildlife doesn't eat them, which is one of the reasons that nothing keeps them in check and one of the reasons they're invasive. So it's like you're creating a sterile environment almost from the perspective of our native wildlife, be it insects or birds or mammals. And like so this is a huge ecological disaster that's in the making. And like climate change, it's happening slow enough that people generally don't recognize it or accept it for the problem that it is. It's just kind of creeping up on us. And to be clear, also, this is not caused by climate change, but climate change does make it worse because climate change stresses the native plants and creates additional opportunities for some of the invasives. So more and there's even more problems, which is the management costs of dealing with this stuff are escalating rapidly. Whether it's the private landowners, whether it's the government entities that own land or deal with it, it's the utilities, the agriculture, and this is not just a rural issue. I mean, if you drive around Charlottesville, you'll see the vines, whether it's kudzu or porcelain berry, they're just overwhelming. The urban canopies as well, along with various ground covers that are causing problems. In the forest, some of the ground covers we'll talk about, are not just covering everything, and it's not, and they don't just impact the native grasses and forbs. They actually can suppress the regeneration of the forest. It's hard for tree seedlings to come up through some of this stuff. So, and then we have the vines, and the vines, which is to me job number one on my property, because my number one objective is to preserve the tree canopy, and the vines I have are perfectly capable of bringing down any tree on the property, and they do that typically is by a combination of either stealing nutrients or putting their leaves up over the top to grab the sunshine. In some cases, they put all kinds of weight, on the trees as well, which makes them susceptible to wind throw. More subtle things that go on are along streams. When the tree canopy is reduced, guess what? The water temperature goes up, and that impacts the trout and other things living in the water. So there's a lot of challenges that these invasive plants are either causing or contributing to. So here's some examples that just illustrate the problems. So here's Asiatic bittersweet. We used to call it Oriental bittersweet, but it just climbs up over everything. and smothers trees and vegetation. The Bradford pear. I mean, we could talk a long time about Bradford pear. They sold millions and millions and millions of these things as a sterile cultivar, uh, and everything was fine until people discovered that it was a brittle tree and had problems, and they started to solve that. They introduced other cultivars of the Callery pear, and all of a sudden, those sterile Bradford pears that were out there all began to reproduce. And now we have scenes like this. So, I mean, all the white flowers you see here are on Bradford pears that have filled in this field along the interstate. And in fact, in the springtime, it's one of the first things to bloom. You see the white flowering Bradford pears in the landscape. They're really easy to spot at first thing in the spring. So let's see here. The next on this slide here we have a couple. We got bamboo. Yeah, bamboo can be really challenging for a lot of people. You can see here it's swallowed a building. If you've got a fence row, there's a pretty good chance you've got Japanese honeysuckle growing on it. Some people have told me it's the most common of the invasive plants in the state of Virginia. It just grows everywhere. Japanese knotweed. This is a really tough one to get rid of. And obviously you can see here it's dwarfing the person. It likes to grow in wet areas, and we'll talk about this one some more later as well. English ivy, still sold in the trade, of course. But around Charlottesville, it's easy to find scenes like this in the woods or even literally in the downtown streets where the ivy is just taken off and taken over. Another one that a lot of people don't tend to see very often, at least not around these parts, but it is here somewhat, is another vine, five-leaf Akebia. I think it's also called chocolate vine. But it's another vine that just grows up and smothers pretty much everything in its path. Porcelain berry. Porcelain berry is really bad around Charlottesville. You drive along I-64 and some other places, and everything along the side of the road is just a green mound. And it's porcelain berry that's just covered the trees from top to bottom. And all you see in the summertime when it's leafed out is these undulating mounds of green. You can't even tell what's underneath it. This is one of the other leaders in the PRISM, William Hammerskey. He literally went to the trouble to cut down an ailanthus tree, tree of paradise, and gather up all the seeds from that small to medium-sized tree sitting here. Sometimes we ask people to guess how many seeds there are there, but there's about 43,000 seeds he got off of that one tree. Japanese stilt grass. If you don't have this, I'm sure you will. It tends to start on the sunny sides of roads, if you will, and then you always hope that it won't go into the deep dark forest, but obviously it does. So it will eventually propagate into the forest. So those are just some examples of the invasives we're dealing with and why it's a problem. And I could ask, I mean, if anybody wants to ask any questions about that before I go on, because I'm about to start talking a few slides here about the Blueridge PRISM and what we do to go after this kind of problem. Okay, Blueridge PRISM. PRISM stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. Generically, we are what's known as a cooperative weed management area, a CWMA. We're still the only active Virginia-based CWMA, even though there are hundreds of them in the United States. If you look at a map of all the CWMAs, many of the western states are 100% covered by cooperative weed management areas. New York State is completely covered by 8 of them. Florida is covered by something like 13. and Nebraska's got like 19. But many of the other eastern states have few or none of these organizations. And and every one of them is a standalone, independent organization, and typically they're collaborations of federal agencies, state and local agencies, conservation organizations, contractors, even private landowners, and almost anything else you can imagine. The but the missions of them vary fairly dramatically. Yeah, most of them, I would say, their focus is on uh, dealing with the lands of the people who have formed the organization. So if it's two federal agencies, two state agencies, and the Nature Conservancy, yeah, they may be mostly focused on the lands that those organizations manage. Whereas our focus as the Blueridge PRISM is on everybody in the geography that we cover, which makes us pretty unusual in the world of cooperative weed management areas. We are nonprofit. We're completely funded by donations. We have employees, but it's still managed and driven, largely by volunteers like myself. The mission is simply to reduce the impact of invasive species in our targeted geography, and to try and really take action across a wild area. Our geography that we target is these 12 counties that include a little over 3.5 million acres. It includes the entire Shenandoah National Park, which is about 200,000 acres. And just as a rough gauge, we've estimated that in this territory, there are 50,000 people who have 5 acres or more, which kind of makes them kind of our sweet spot for what we deal with. But we also deal with people who have a city lot or an acre in a suburb or what have you. So we're here to help everybody in the geography, and as you'll see on some other topics, statewide as well. The people that have been involved, we have an advisory council. So we have people like the Native Plant Society and various state and federal organizations involved. We have lots of other partners that we actively work with that you can see over here on the right. These lists have a tendency to change and grow a little bit. So, but what does the PRISM do? Well, we have two core activities. One is within our home geography of 12 counties to educate, inspire, and help landowners who are interested in figuring out how to remove and replace the invasive plants in their property. At the same time, a few years ago, we broadened our impact to try and take actions to deal with the invasive plant problem across the entire state. So this is more policy, legislation, and other types of activities, some of which I will talk about here in a moment. So in terms of landowner-focused information activities, we have quarterly meetings with guest speakers who present, and that's all available online. We do table at events. Tabling was all shut down during the pandemic, but we're slowly re-engaging at events and doing tabling things where we hand out literature and answer people's questions. We obviously do speaking engagements. This is one of those, and happy to do all the above. Workshops. We'll talk about that some more. Several times a year, we have workshops that help people understand how to identify, control, and the tools that are available to do this. So we also publish a newsletter on a quarterly basis to people who are on our email list. You can go to our website, and we have lots of materials and links to other people's materials on our website. If you have a plant and you're not sure what it is, you're welcome to make some really good photos of it and send it in to info@blueridgeprism.org. And there's a pretty good chance we'll get you an answer as to what the plant is. In terms of landowner services, one of the things we've been fortunate to be able to do within our 12 county area is to hire two people whose primary job is to go out and visit with landowners, walk their properties with them, help them understand what they have, and point them in the right directions, either to get advice or services or strategies for how to deal with what they're dealing with there. In a typical year these days, we have something over 2,000 people who attend our events of one kind or another. We're currently sitting on, I haven't checked the number lately, but it's certainly, we're over 5,000 people on our email list, and it's probably going up by at least 500 a year. Okay, something happened. Here we go. Some of the statewide activities we're involved in with the Department of Forestry. Yeah, we participate with them in a variety of different ways, whether it's with their hardwood initiative or their forest stewardship coordinating committee. They've helped us with grants, and we've helped them with various different things. We did a study with the Department of Transportation having to do with, what's growing along the roadsides on 55,000 miles of roadside in the state of Virginia, because at the time we started this, their planting list consisted mostly of non-natives and included one or two invasives. And so they've now taken the invasives off their planting list as a result of this. And they've gotten through this study that we got them to do with Virginia Tech. They've gotten some recommendations on native plants to be used for their roadside construction and maintenance projects. So so that was some real progress. With the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, we participate in a couple of different things. Notably, we are one of the primary drivers for getting more plants onto the Virginia noxious weeds list. And if something actually gets on the noxious weeds list, that means that it's not allowed to be sold or transported around the state other than for research purposes. It can't be shipped into the state. So it's not a very long list. But you can see here's a list of 12 plants that have not yet shown up on the list, but they're working their way through the process. We got them approved by the VDAX board 2 Decembers ago, and it's probably going to take another year before they officially, show up on the noxious weeds list. And you'd think, gee, why wasn't kudzu and some of these other things on the list to begin with? Well, there's lots of stories we can tell you about the difficulties of getting things onto the noxious weeds list, including getting the law changed. When we first started this process, literally the law said, if it's widely disseminated, it can't be put on the noxious weeds list. Think about that. So yeah, that was why things like kudzu couldn't be put on the noxious weeds list until we actually got the law changed. So there's still impediments, but it's not as bad as it used to be. With the University of Virginia, we help them get grant money to have a PhD student use a very sophisticated drone with a hyperspectral imaging camera to fly over property and see if we could prove that you could use this equipment to detect specific plants and map them. So they've been doing most of their work on autumn olive and ailanthus, and it's looking pretty good. So it's not a commercially viable thing at this point yet, but they've achieved our primary objective, I think, which is to prove that this is technology that can be developed and can be used for this purpose. Department of Conservation and Recreation, we've got all kinds of work that we do with them over time, including some of the work on the noxious weeds list with them as well. So that's some of the things we do there. Some other statewide activities. We spent all of last year planning a 3-day workshop that we actually held this last December. It was by invitation only. We had 80 people from all over the state representing 78 different organizations, who had an interest in the invasive plant topic to come together for 3 days with a professionally facilitated workshop to come out with different, if you will, initiatives to take, and we're now organizing those initiatives to go do different things to try and help with the invasive plant problem. I've been on the advisory council for the Virginia Forestry Association. One of the things we're actively working on are ways to reduce the retail sale of plants on the DCR list of invasive plants. So the Department of Conservation and Recreation, publishes a list of 90 invasive plants in the state of Virginia. Roughly a third of those, you can go buy. And people are buying them and still planting them. And most of the people who buy them and plant them do not realize that they're planting invasive plants. And so there's, we have a lot of action and energy being spent on trying to fix that problem. And of course, with if you guys are far enough away from the spotted lanternfly, so you haven't seen it yet, and we've only had a few of them show up where I am, but northwestern Virginia is getting inundated with them, and certainly Pennsylvania has. And one of the things you probably won't hear, unfortunately, but you should, is that if you remove your Ailanthus before the bug arrives, you'll probably have 75% fewer bugs. It won't stop them. They feed on other things, but the Ailanthus is by far their number one preferred food, and it helps them mature in time to lay more eggs before the frost kills them off. So if you have the opportunity, I would strongly recommend you get your Ailanthus out of the way before this bug arrives. And of course, if anybody out there, including yourselves, have an interest in forming another PRISM, we're very interested in helping. Some other things that are going on, statewide implications, there's various things going on in the legislature right now. There's a bill in the House and there's a bill in the Senate, both targeted at doing better labeling at the point of sale. So this is part of our attempt to suppress the demand for the invasive plants, because when somebody goes to buy them at a point of sale, there's nothing that tells them this is an invasive plant. We're trying to fix that problem. We've also, there's a couple of budget amendments in there, one for funding some additional positions in 4 different agencies to put people in place that can help with invasive plant problems around the state. There's a pilot project there's funding proposed for VDOT to do a pilot project along some of the roadsides in Northern Virginia in terms of taking out vines. There's a bill out there, HB 1167, to allow local governments to ban the sale and implementation of English ivy locally. A lot of people have been working on that for years. We'll see if this bill gets through. There's another bill that's in there that's targeted at making it easier for volunteers to use herbicides on public lands. Today, in many places, we have lots of volunteers happy to help get invasive plants out of public parks, but they're not allowed to use herbicides, even under the direction of a certified commercial applicator. So we're trying to get that fixed so that under proper control and supervision, volunteers can help apply herbicides. And again, we're only talking about unrestricted herbicides and only for dealing with invasive plants. So that's some of the statewide activities and other things that we're involved in. So if people got questions about any of that, you can interrupt and be happy to address some of that. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on and start talking about common local invasives and with some samples of how we present, how to identify some of these plants. So there's 4 groups of plants that we typically talk about in our ID sessions for landowners. Vines is one category, grasses and forbs is another. The ones that are in italics here are the ones that we tend to go into in depth, although we sometimes talk about some of the others as well. So this is the vines, grasses, and forbs. We also talk about trees, and as well quite a few shrubs. So here's an example of what we do if you attend one of our workshops on ID. So here we have Asiatic bittersweet. So here you can see the rounded leaves with either the flower buds or the berries forming along the stem. You can see here they've matured and much bigger, and the leaf colors has changed to more of the lighter green. And here's of course the iconic berries, yeah, here on the right, that you see in the fall, draped on the vines, frequently along roadsides. And here's a picture of a tree that's got half a dozen bittersweet vines, growing up it. Yeah, if you can see, if you can see my picture here, yeah, which you can't because I got the slides up. I've got samples of some of this kind of stuff that I show off. Uh, in fact, that's this sample right here is sitting right next to me on the table. Yeah, this you can see this is about a 3.5 inch diameter, vine. I call this medium size. We've had much bigger ones, at least here on our property. Fortunately, we don't even have them this big anymore. We've knocked them all back. But and this one's 16 years old, so they're slow growing, but just like a tree, you can count the tree rings and see how old your vines are. Uh, Frequently in the growing season, you can just see this long, sinuous, bending string like this sticking up with the new growth. Really easy to spot, even when you're driving along the side of the road. It's sticking out from the roadside. Another real telltale, if you're not sure what you're looking at, if you pull up one of these and look at the roots, really distinctive, orange roots, for the plant. Really makes it pretty obvious, what you're dealing with. So here's winter creeper. This is one that's evergreen, so it's really easy to spot in the wintertime. If you look at the leaves closely, they've got that light center vein. If they're growing up a tree or the side of a house, typically you'll see lots of individual vines growing up as a mass. Another one here is there's multiflora rose, which is an impenetrable bush. It's curiously, it's one of the first plants to leaf out in March. At least here it's in March. Down where you are, it might be even earlier. But one of the things we've discovered here and we do this actively, is when this plant is about half leafed out. That's typically before anything else has leafed out, so all the natives have not leafed out yet. If you go after it with a foliar spray, you can kill the plant without having any collateral damage to the other plants around it. And we've been very successful, here, taking that approach. When you look at it, you can see, the backward curve on the thorns. If you're wondering whether this is a multiflora rose or some other version of rose, there are some things that are totally indicative of it, that confirms that it's multiflora rose. The thorns is one, and the next picture will also show this stipula here, that's also indicative. So here it is. The stipule. You can see this little flag at the bottom of the arrow. That's unique to multiflora rose. And here's the flowers draped along the roadsides. Rose hips. It can produce a large plant can produce 1 million seeds a year. That's pretty aggressive. Here's a picture of it when it's really young, growing along the forest floor. So another one which we have quite a bit right where I live, is burning bush. It's a Euonymus alatus. It leaves out early. It's got tiny flowers in May and June. You don't really notice those too much, and does a decent job of growing in the shade. So here it is lining both sides of this path. That's sometimes also called winged euonymus. because like the wing stem flower, it's got these wings, growing along the stem, which also makes it easy to identify. Here's pictures of the berries and seeds, if you will, and you can see the wings on the stems as well. Japanese grass. Yeah, if you don't have it, you will. This is an interesting plant. Yeah, it's totally incredibly prolific. Yeah, really moves all over the place. It's also an annual. So if you want to try and control stiltgrass, the key is to kill it before it goes to seed. So you interrupt the seeding cycle, because all the stiltgrass that you see this coming year is from seeds laid down in prior years. The plant at the end of the season just dies. So in fact, over the winter, you can see where it was, because you can see these patches of straw that are still sitting there, and will be there all winter long. One of the things we've experimented with only mixed results, is taking some of these patches and try and put a pre-emergent on them to see if that makes a difference. And it's not something that we've had enough success with that I would recommend it, but you can try it. Again, what does it look like? You've got the white vein going down the center of the leaf. Sometimes people get it confused with deer tongue, which is a native plant. You can see the deer tongue in this picture. You can see how the leaf, for example, wraps around the stem, and the leaves are not exactly the same. Here's just a single plant. They tend to be bushy little things, but don't be fooled. They can grow 3 or 4 feet tall, and really smother pretty much everything else in its place. A lot of people never notice the seeds, and that's because the seeds are green, just like the stem, and they protrude out at the end of the stem in typically late summer, and you can actually see them before they start. And this is one of those plants that when you try to control it, you can pull it up by hand if you only have small amounts of it. You could use herbicides, and we can talk about grass-specific herbicides that you could deal with it. But it's also susceptible to mechanical control if you've got large patches of stiltgrass. One of the things we discovered here is if you take a weed whacker late in the season, but just before it starts to go to seed, and you weed whack it down to bare earth, it turns out what happens is there's not enough time for it to resprout and come back and mature to the point of producing seeds anymore. So at the end of the season, it dies, and it never went to seed. And so, mechanical control is possible with stiltgrass. Here's just a carpet of it when it's really young. Vinca, periwinkle. I've planted periwinkle in my landscaping, and I don't do it anymore. But this picture was taken down the street from where I live, where it's gone wild, and it's just literally covering the roadsides, all up and down, half a mile of roadside here. And even in this picture, it's somewhat evergreen. And in fact, in February a year ago, this one is, I can't see it offhand right here, but there's at least one flower still in this picture. They have pretty flowers. That's why we do it. It blooms until June, and from June until frost. Okay, Japanese knotweed. Yeah, this is a horrendous plant. Fortunately, it doesn't grow everywhere, but it's really nasty and really hard to get rid of. And it prefers to be in the wetter areas, which is why in this picture, for example, it's growing in the ditch, and that's not uncommon. It can get, of course, quite huge. And some of the things you can use to identify it is it's got these regular nodes on the stem, like bamboo. If you break it open, it tends to be hollow. So some of the leaves tend to be heart shaped or somewhat rounded, with a relatively flat back to it. and frequently the stems have a zigzag. So if you're not sure, and it does put out white flowers. So yeah, there are things you, if you're not sure, you can look at here to find it. If you find it, this is one of those things where you want to figure out how to take care of it. And we have people who have who have gotten rid of it, but boy, it's not easy. Here's a picture of it just coming up in the springtime, where the new leaves are reddish and furled, and flowers in the summer. Everybody's favorite tree, haha. The ailanthus, tree of heaven, stink tree. People talk about this one a lot. So, here's William with his seed basket. This is typically what they look like now in the middle of the winter. They frequently still have, leaves, hanging on them, even though you can see the other trees are still green. They get quite huge. That's a big one there. So how do you identify them? Well, the leaves are one of the best ways to do it, and people do get them confused with walnut and with sumac, but there are some real differences. So yeah, and I think that the next slide here talks about these. So one of the things that's really unique and specific to ailanthus is you can see here at the base of the leaf, there's a notch on each side, uh, and only at the base, as opposed to sumac, which has toothed the leaves all the way along. Walnut has tiny teeth, but no notches. So that's another characteristic. If you look at the bark, the barks are quite different. Ailanthus has this smoothish, grayish kind of bark. Sumac has more of a pockmarked look to it, and walnut is dark. So again, these are all ailanthus barks here. So you get the picture of it's grayish with kind of a snake skin, alligator skin, kind of a look to it typically. But the pattern varies all over the place. Those of you who are used to the hack and squirt method can see actually some of these trees have been hacked and squirted. We'll talk about that in a little while. Here's another picture of a young one. And again, you can really see the notches at the base of the leaves. It really stands out. Seed cluster. So this is the immature seed cluster early on. And then they typically go from the yellow green. You can see that the higher ones up in this tree are have turned red. And then eventually they turn brown. So here's Bradford pear. The picture we saw earlier, blooming early in the spring. It has a really nice conical shape. Everybody loves the shape. It's a great landscaping tree until it breaks. They're very fragile. They're brittle trees, which is why ultimately the nursery trade felt they had to introduce other cultivars of the Callery pear that caused the problem. So they've got these beautiful white blossoms. People use them to line their driveways and have this pretty showy flower show in the springtime. Glossy leaves here on the left. And if you look carefully in this picture, you can see the little fruits that it produces. I don't believe they're edible. And as the leaves turn red in the fall. And beware, serious thorns. They've been known to puncture tractor tires. So those are, again, examples of what we talked through in terms of identifying plants. If you come to one of our workshops, online, you can listen through, people talking about 20 or 20 some different plants, how to identify them and what to do. So we'll shift a little bit here to planning and doing control work. I've got about 15 slides left that I'm going to go through here quickly. If you're going to be doing control work, the first trick is to define what you're trying to do. Are you trying to eradicate something completely, or are you trying to control it? Where are you? What are you trying to accomplish? Make sure you understand what you've got. on your site, and then make a plan for how you're going to go about it, and map out what your strategy is, and if figure out whether you're going to rehabilitate or do anything afterwards, and then just keep at it. It's going to take years in most of these cases to really make the progress that you want to make. This is just a quick example of what happens if you map which you've got on your property. So this is a map of the bittersweet on my property here. And the bigger the red dot, the more intense the infestation. This was done some number of years ago. But yeah, this really visualized, yeah, and begged the question of, okay, what's the strategy? Do you do the stuff on the right-hand side where there isn't much, and you make sure that it doesn't get established and try and eradicate it there? Or do you go after the core, the 4 or 5 core areas where it's really intense, and really knock it out? So if you know what you've got and where it is, you can have these conversations and consider different strategies for what you're trying to do. Some things to do in terms of being effective. Yeah, if you can, do it when the plants are young. Do it when the seeds are not there, so you're not spreading them around. You do have to be careful about sanitation, and what that means is make sure you're not spreading the seeds on your equipment, yeah, on your shoes, on sticky seeds sticking to your pants or what have you. If you're going to be doing pulling of one kind or another, do it when the soil is moist, so the roots are more likely to come out. If you're dealing with vines and trees, I tell people never, ever try to pull vines out of trees. If you pull on a big vine, you don't know what branch you're going to let loose up above, and the vine itself can sometimes have incredible amounts of weight. So it can be really dangerous. If you kill the vine, you let Mother Nature bring it down out of the tree. And of course, if you're using herbicides, yeah, the label is the law. So we all need to follow the rules that come with each of the herbicides. So there's lots of different techniques for getting rid of invasive plants. There's the manual techniques, whether it's pulling or cutting or grubbing and different plants. Yeah, there are different opportunities to do things manually. Mechanical, whether it's mowing, using the weed whacker, for example, with the stilt grass. For some things, you can use chainsaws. If you've got a really big infestation and you want to just do a major reset, yeah, you may want to employ a forest mulcher. And if you're not sure what that is, I can explain that later on in a second. Tractors can pull some things out of the ground, although the trick is getting all the roots. And of course, there's all kinds of herbicide opportunities, whether it's foliar spray, what we call the cut stump, where you cut it off and then treat the cut face of the stump. Hack and squirt, which is what we typically use with Atlantis out in the woods, where you make little cuts around the perimeter of the tree and put concentrated herbicide just into the cuts, so you're not spraying around. Basal bark is where you use an oil penetrating spray on the bark, and it goes through and kills it. Biological refers to using goats or other biological controls, if you will. There's lots of tools out there that can be brought to bear. Again, these are demonstrated. We do in-person sessions in our quarterly, a couple of times a year workshops, where we demonstrate different tools and show people the actual plants in the wild. So here's an example of what we do in the control workshop, the online version. So here's some bittersweet. And so, okay, this is what we call the cut stump method for a hanging vine. So you find the bottom of the vine, you take a pair of loppers, for example, and cut it off. You take a concentrated herbicide and just put it on the cut face, and that will kill the vine. Then you can, if you will, cover it back over so you're not making a good fertile bed for other invasive seeds to take hold. If it's a bigger vine, you may need to use a saw or a handheld chainsaw to cut it off. We also recommend you do what some people call a window cut. You can see here that it's being cut up high, and we would also cut it down low. And the reason for making the two cuts is twofold. One, if you leave it hanging all the way to the ground, it may become a trellis for a new vine to grow up. And it also means that when you come walking back through the woods a week later, you may look at it and think, oh, gee, that one's still connected. And you may go over and treat it only to discover that you've already done it. So if you cut it up high as well as cutting it low, you solve both of those problems. So getting started, if you're going to go out and do this kind of work, the first trick is, of course, to understand what you've got. Set your priorities and objectives. So, my two biggest priorities, here on my property, for example, but everybody's got a different situation. My two top priorities are: number one is to save the canopy, and number two, right behind it, is to take those invasives that I know I have here, but I don't have very much, and see if I can eradicate them. So I've got a few of those I work on, and then I've got another 10 or 12 that we work on in the course of the year. But we do have priorities. So again, create a plan, know what you're going to do, what time of year. Some of these things, for example, what we did just there with the bittersweet, you don't want to do in the springtime when the sap's rising, because you're trying to put that herbicide on the cut face and have it go down to the roots. And if you're doing it in the spring before leaf out, then all the sap is rising and there's nothing going down, and it'll just push the herbicide out of the plant. So then again, once you've got your plan, you figure out what you can do, or do you need help? If you need assistance, line it up. If it's contractors, you might want to get some bids, and then plan on executing it over and over again. If you want to learn more, again, the PRISM workshops, we give these multiple times a year. They're either inexpensive or free. The next plant ID session is March 26th, online. The next control session is March 27th, online. You guys are a little far away. We do an equipment and plant walk in person on April 5th. And we always invite people to bring their own plant if they want help identifying something. Again, we do quarterly meetings with speakers. You can consider having your area forester from the Department of Forestry to come visit, walk your property with you. Sometimes the NRCS, the district conservationists, will also come walk and give you advice. If you're up here in our territory, we've got our own people who can come walk the property with you. If you've got a large property, you might want to have the forester create a forest management plan. You can ask about financial assistance. Sometimes the Department of Forestry or the NRCS has financial assistance available. It varies. And as I say at the bottom here, you can have one of our people, if you're in our 12 counties, come and walk your property with you. Again, we've got landowner training courses. There's fact sheets and other stuff on our website. You can get on the Department of Forestry website or through a link on our website. They've got a really good two-page summary that we help them put together that summarizes all the different treatment methods for the grasses, forbs, the vines, the shrubs, the trees, all on one sheet of, 2 sheets of paper, if you will. There's a contractor list on our website, as well as sources for herbicides and equipment. There's lots of books available to help out. And the Department of Conservation and Recreation, I mentioned, has a list of 90 invasive plants. I believe they're in the process. They've just started updating that. I have no idea how many plants will be on it in the next issue, but it could go up by anywhere from a dozen or two to 40 or 50. Yeah, there's lots of candidates that probably do need to be added to it. It's a question of how quickly they can do the work. Again, resources available on our website that you can print off. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these books. Particularly the two on the right are really good ones. I really like them. The one on the far right is the Field Guide to an Identification of Invasive Plants in Southern Forests. Its companion guide in the middle is the Management Guide for how to deal with them. They don't publish these anymore, but last time I checked with them, they said they still update them, and you can download them for free. And then, of course, there's Doug Tallamy's books. There's Virginia Digital Atlas. And that brings me down to the end here in terms of, well, we can go do questions. And if anybody wants to be added to our mailing list, I would strongly recommend it. And of course, if anybody out there is interested in forming a Southwest Virginia Prism, would love to have that conversation. So, but I'm going to stop sharing, and we can go back to seeing each other.
Rod, I've added a couple of questions to the chat. Um, I think one of the most important ones for me, and maybe my perspective is valid for others, but it's where we're starting in our yard, which is just an acre, so it's a very humble thing. Everything is mechanical that we do. But the starting point for us basically is the various invasive species lists. So, some of the things that we have questions about are things that we have because we live in a neighborhood and to some extent, we get colonized by the burning bush across the street, and things like that. And then there are things, that we don't want seed from our plants to colonize other areas or to be a threat to natural areas. Um, so I'm wondering if you can give us some guidance as far as how to use the lists. So like I know that there are different threat levels for some of the plants. If it's a low threat, do we disregard it or do we not? Deprioritize. Yeah, deprioritize. If we have thought of a plant as invasive but don't see it on one of the DCR lists, what do we do with that information? I mean, I have an addiction to some of these plants, like, like a junkie might have to a drug of choice. But, so like I like butterfly bush. I've dutifully gotten rid of them, but that's one of the ones that isn't on the DCR list. So could you just give us some guidance about what do we
Yeah.
do with the information in the lists?
Well, the big issue with the DCR list is that it was published in 2014, so
Oh,
it's 10 years old. So
okay.
one of our legislative successes last year was the governor signed a bill that did a variety of different things for us. But one of the things it did is it required DCR to update their list every 4 years.
Okay.
So some of the things that, yeah, are invasive but are not on that list are going to start showing up on the lists. So
Are there
it's
other sources that we could go to be a little more comprehensive in our knowledge and for guiding our actions on our own property?
Yeah. So if you figure out what a plant is, so there's kind of a two-step process.
Mhm.
If you figure out what the plant is, actually you can do a pretty good job just by taking the name of the plant and Googling it with the word invasive and see what you get back.
Yeah.
There are people out there, like I think it's the Missouri Botanical Gardener Institute, that does a really good job of coming up with answers to questions like that. But there's no, to my knowledge, there's no better comprehensive list of all the plants that are in your area or my area that are invasive. But our objective is to get the DCR list to be that. And so that's why we got that provision put into the bill, so that we can get the right word out to people, so they understand what it is. Now, to one of your other points, if you, I would suggest personally, if I had an acre, and if I had any of the plants on the DCR list, I would get rid of them. For both of the reasons you cited, which is, first of all, it's going to be a management headache for me, and I really don't want to inflict it upon my neighbors. I mean, that's one of the problems with the fact that a third of the DCR list is still in the trade. I mean, people are planting this and not realizing, they're not only creating a problem for themselves, they are creating problems for their neighbors.
Mhm.
There's a question from Donna Edwards. What's the most important thing we can do to make sure invasive species are reported for our own counties and states and listed as such on the Invasive Plant Atlas or DCR list? And also, what additionally can you tell us about the Invasive Plant Atlas?
I am not familiar with what is being referred to as the Invasive Plant Atlas.
And Donna, if you would like to unmute and follow up on that, I mean, please do. Or maybe I need to unmute you. I don't think so. I think.
I can.
There she is.
I can. Here I am. Yeah. The invasive plant atlas is. I refer to that all the time, for information on where a given non-native plant is invasive, and I find it to be a wonderful tool. It shows what counties it's been reported in as being in as there being an infestation of that species in various counties. And then it also shows which states have reported it as being invasive. So, it's a graphically helpful tool, because you can see, for the plants, the species that are really invasive, you can see these large blocks of states that have reported it as being invasive. So, I just wanted to know if you had any suggestions on what we can do to make sure those plants are reported and get on the list when they are invasive in our areas.
Well, the folks at the Department of Conservation and Recreation are very, very tuned into all the different databases that are out there. And EdMaps out of the University of Georgia is another one that does something very similar. You can go in there and inquire by plant, and see which counties it's been reported as being in. The problems with most of these things that rely on people to report is they're spotty, and they don't necessarily show the full extent for some of the plants. Some of the more common ones, show up, very well, but others are radically underreported.
We have another question. This one is from George, and I guess I interpret it as a site occupation question. He says, after removing invasive plants, what is there guidance for what to plant in place of them? Because an unoccupied site is an open invitation for weed or an invasive plant.
Well, and it's a great question. The and there's no easy answer. We've debated this topic in the PRISM, and we've had various forums that we've held, to talk about it. The problem is whatever you want to plant is, of course, very site specific, and so there's just because this particular invasive grows there doesn't mean this particular native necessarily will. So there's not necessarily a one for one. As a practical matter, I will tell you what 99% of the people do is they wait and see, because you can be really surprised at how much of a seed bank is already present, including natives. And even if you went and planted something yourself, you're still going to get stuff coming back in the seed bank, both from the invasive that you took out, because that's probably got a substantial seed bank there as well, and plus the natives that might have been there before or during the infestation. So what a lot of people do, or most people do, is they wait to see what comes up, and then in effect weed the garden, and allow the natives to stay, and try and take out the non-natives.
One of my other questions is related to the soil seed bank. I am tempted to do some work on stilt grass on property that belongs. It's related to church property, but it's a quite large stream bank area. So I was wondering about the persistence of Japanese stilt grass seed in the soil bank. Say, if we are able to get our timing right for mechanically controlling that next summer, um, I assume that there may be some maintenance involved.
Yeah. Yeah, you should expect that if you totally prevent it from going to seed this year, that next year you'll still have a substantial infestation because the seed bank persists for quite a number of years. I mean, we'd all like to think that in the first year, pick a number, 70 or 80% of those seeds will germinate. And in fact, they might, but there's just so many of them that yeah, there'll be plenty left for years, yeah, two, 3, and 4. But yeah, after 3 or 4 or 5 years of doing this, yeah, I think you'll see if you do it thoroughly, you'll see a steady decrease in the numbers. But yeah, it's going to take a while. I mean, this is a tough job.
Come on. Come here. Stay here.
So
Now, another thing, I think when Beth was approaching you about talking, she got suggestions for, what are our favorite, invasives that we hate. And frankly, I was thinking more along the lines of the weeds in my garden as invasive. So I was thinking of things like quackgrass or,
and personally, I'm not sure what quackgrass is.
well, I may not be either. It's the grass with the rhizome, kind of a jointed rhizome that is just impossible to get rid of. But anyway, I'll withdraw my question. It seems to be just, my own misunderstanding about what an invasive plant is that
Well,
motivated my concern.
it's one thing for a plant to be a weed in your garden. It's something else for if it's out on the landscape. It just overwhelms.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it spreads without end, if you will, and overwhelms everything in its path. I mean, those are the ones we're really concerned about. There's a lot of plants that show up where you don't want them, and we call those weeds. But yeah, the invasives are really represent threats to the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Rod, could you talk a little bit about what you recommend on Japanese knotweed as far as, yeah,
You
it's a
know,
terrible thing.
yeah, I have, knock on wood. I personally have never had to deal with it. Uh, I think a couple of the other guys in the Prism have had some experience actually trying to knock it out. I will tell you the closest experience I've had to doing that is taking out bamboo.
Mm.
And we've done pretty well in my neighborhood here. We there were 4 stands of bamboo, and th th two of them we took out and never saw anything come back. The third one came back a little bit the next year, and the really big stand it still comes back a little bit every year, but it's easy to kind of top it off and deal with it. And it's painful. I mean, what we do with the bamboo is we literally take each stem. We cut it off relatively close to the ground, just above one of the knuckles, and we paint the cut face with a concentrated herbicide, uh, and we don't fill the tube. It's hollow. We don't fill the tube. We paint the cut face where the transpiration, the up and down goes. And then we go on to the next one. And it turns out if you're going to do this, if you want to try that technique, it's a really good 3-person job where one person cuts, one person hauls the brush away, and the third person paints the cut face.
Okay.
I mean, because when you're painting a cut face with an herbicide, you pretty much want to do it right away. I mean, and this technique will work for most woody plants, even though arguably knotweed and bamboo, you can argue whether they're woody or not, but being a grass, but I've had good success with this with bamboo. I mean, another technique, of course, is to literally just dig it all up and get all the roots and rhizomes and everything out of there. I know people who've dug up huge clumps of bamboo and done that, and I would expect that would work with knotweed. But boy, that's the nuclear option.
Yeah.
Other people talk about spraying it. Other people will talk about cutting it down and putting black plastic over it and trying to starve it, if you will, that way. I'm skeptical.
And I know of people who've done that, and it's just grown through the plastic.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
My expectation is that will, most of the time it'll just come right up through it. So yeah, I think this is it's going to be one of the above. It's either foliar spray of some kind. It's doing what I do with bamboo, or it's digging it out.
Yeah. Okay.
There are a couple of other questions. Another one from Donna is regarding the apps.bugwood.org, or maybe it's just bugwood.org, and she wonders if you can comment on that. George also would like to know the best time for treating the cut stump of bush honeysuckle.
Okay, one at a time. Budwood.org is a fabulous resource. These are the folks down at the University of Georgia who have compiled all kinds of information about invasive plants. And it's a great resource for many different things. So, there's lots of they run the EdMaps program, I believe, which is one of the ones that maps and inventories where invasive plants have occurred across the country. And there are 2 or 3 different systems like that where you can report your own sightings. There's a Maiden, Maedn is another one. And there's a couple of those out there, but EdMaps is the one most of us use most of the time. And I believe that's EDDMAPS, and it's out of the University of Georgia along with Budwood.org. So then the second question was.
The second question is about bush honeysuckle.
Bush honeysuckle.
When's the best time to treat the cut stump?
Yeah, so I would say after leaf out, and up, we're getting close to the point where you might still be able. Well, here where I am, we might still be able to do it now, but we're on the edge, because once the sap starts to rise in the springtime, you don't want to do it. At that point, you want to wait for full leaf out, because after full leaf out, that means that the products of photosynthesis are going down to the roots, and there's stuff going in both directions. In the springtime, it's all going up, which means that any herbicide you put on the cut face is not going to go down. So you want to wait to do that until after full leaf out and the plant is operating in both directions.
Dick Olson has a comment, and he says that our chapter has been recently contacted about helping remove invasives along the Virginia Creeper Trail. And I think his reaction is that this sounds like what is the WCM? But it sounds like or no, the cooperative weed management area. But anyway, his comment is that it sounds like a prism like approach to looking at a weed problem.
I'm not sure what the question is, but
Yeah, I think it's more of a comment, and I don't know if it's something you would like to respond to or not.
well, if there's another prism-like organization, I guess I'd like to know who it is.
No,
Well,
my comment was kind of what I mean, one of your last slides was if we were interested in starting a Prism-like project, and I'm not. I have plenty to do already, but there was a group that was interested in removing invasives along the Virginia Creeper Trail, and it's all kinds of landowners adjacent to the trail that would be contributing, and it seemed like a cooperative weed management area, something like a prison. And I guess my question was, uh, if we were to respond to this group, what kind of guidance would we give? Just say, hey, contact Rod and look at your website, or in other words, have you been successful in getting another group start a cooperative weed management area? What do you think would be needed? Would it succeed down here with the Virginia Creeper Trail?
Well, I mean, there's no reason why it can't succeed, but you asked also the right question, which is what does it take for it to succeed? And the number one thing that it requires is leadership. Yeah, you say as you point out, you've got more things on your plate, so you can't do it. And guess what? That's true of pretty much everybody. So what you need are some people who are interested enough in this topic that they're going to make it, a primary use of their time, and preferably two or three or four of those people. So you've got kind of a core group that's willing to take on and conduct activities of one kind or another, depending upon what their geography and what their objectives are. And we cover 12 counties. But on the other hand, if somebody wants to cover half a county, that's not a problem. Okay. I mean, and every organization of this type is different and unique, and they construct their own their own mission, their own objectives, their own geography, and their own strategies. On the other hand, we are willing to share 100% everything we do. And if they want to use our materials, our techniques, our training, if they want us to give our workshops, if they want to have us be the guest speakers that come in and they're going to get 50 landowners lined up to do a ID or control session, we're particularly if it's online, given the distance, not a problem. I mean, we're happy to do those kinds of things. And we're in conversations with one or two other people in Virginia at this point, who are considering whether they can take this on.
So it seems like the towns of Abingdon and Damascus do entities like those form cooperative weed management areas? Like the town, like an incorporated town?
Well, I mean, incorporated town typically has a Parks and Rec department, and they just do it. I mean, they don't need to form another organization. It's when you want to cover multiple jurisdictions, or some wider area, that you would typically form a cooperative weed management area.
Ann and Stan Tucker are interested in the application of concentrated herbicides and want to know if there's an issue with being close to other desirable trees or plants when you apply those herbicides.
So if you're doing, for example, what I illustrated with the bittersweet vines, where the herbicide was being put on the cut face of the vine, or if you're doing hack and squirt, with an ailanthus tree, for example, do you have to be concerned about the herbicide getting to other plants? So if the herbicide has only been applied, to your target plant, generally there should not be a problem. And part of the reason for that is, typically what we're using when we do that was one of two herbicides. It's either glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, or it's a thing called triclopyr, both of which are unrestricted herbicides available for purchase, either in the local co-op store or over the internet. But both of them have a half-life when they get into the soil. So whether it's order of magnitude 50-day half-life. So once they hit the soil, if and when they even get to the soil, because if you're putting it on the cut face or a hack and squirt, it's not even being applied to the soil. And sub herbicides, particularly not these that I'm talking about, some herbicides will actually flow through the ground with the groundwater, and they will move. Okay, whereas these two herbicides tend to bind with the ground particles, if and when they hit the ground, and they don't flow through the ground like a lot of other herbicides do. So generally, this has not been reported to be a problem, and not something we encounter as an issue.
I'm not seeing any other questions, and we've kept you for a long time. So, uh, but before we let you go, I would like for all present to know that you've waived your honorarium and have requested that that be donated to PRISM and to the work that PRISM does. So I just wanted to share that before we let you go, and thank you sincerely for a very informative program. And if Donna would turn her microphone off, I'd ask about wild garlic so I could hear her reaction.
I use it like chives myself.
Yeah, I've done that.
That too.
Yeah. I've even boiled some and kind of mashed out the paste and
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and let me just reiterate. I mean, if people want to learn more and do a deeper dive, I mean, I mentioned that we've got these sessions coming up in late March that you can sign up for through our website, and you'll learn a lot more about ID and a lot more about control.
well, thank you very much. You're getting a lot of thank yous on the chat, and a lot of praise for a good presentation. So
Well,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks
Hey,
so much, Rod. Yeah.
it's a pleasure. And if there's anything else I can do to be of service, let us know. That's why we're here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Have a great evening.
You
Thank you.
too.
Mhm.